January 1944. The jungle still dripped from a night of rain, each branch shedding cold beads that pattered softly onto the churned red earth below. Dawn had not yet broken. Only a faint grayness seeped between the trees, barely revealing the uneven line of foxholes carved into the slope. Steam rose from men's fatigues as they waited in silence, trying not to think about the sniper who had kept them pinned since yesterday. A single rifle rested upright against a root, a slim, battered carbine with a stock so scratched and pale it looked more like a fence post than a weapon of war. Most in the unit dismissed it as underpowered, unreliable, better suited for rear echelon troops. Command had even told him not to bring it on patrol, but he kept it anyway. Now he eased forward, slow and deliberate, feeling the wet soil soak through his knees. Somewhere in the treetops, a Japanese marksman was already awake, already watching. The next few seconds would decide whether his weapon's reputation would remain a joke or something else entirely. And to understand how this moment came to be, we have to step back into the larger world that shaped it. The Pacific War had reached its grinding middle years, a period defined not by sweeping advances, but by bitter, inch-by-inch campaigns across ridges, reefs, and jungled slopes. By early 1944, American forces were pushing through island chains that had been fortified by the Japanese long before the first shots at Pearl Harbor. Every ridge seemed to hide a dug-in bunker. Every clearing could be a killing field. And every tree, every dark notch in its canopy, might conceal a sniper whose patience could outlast hunger, exhaustion, and fear. The U.S. military entered this environment carrying a mix of weapons shaped largely by European assumptions. Wide fields of fire, longer sight lines, battles decided at distance. The standard infantry rifle, the M1 Garand, excelled in open terrain. Belt-fed machine guns covered long arcs with immense firepower. Even the doctrine surrounding marksmanship assumed visibility. But the Pacific was different. Visibility collapsed to 20 meters. Shots came from angles no training range could prepare for. Engagements were sudden, brief, and lethal. This was the world into which the M1 Carbine arrived. Designed in 1940-41 as a lightweight defensive weapon for support troops, radio operators, mortar crews, and officers, the carbine weighed little more than half of what the Garand did. Its recoil was light, its handling was quick, and at short range, its .30 caliber round, more powerful than a pistol yet weaker than a full rifle cartridge, was intended to give rear area personnel a fighting chance if ambushed. But in the Pacific, weapons rarely stayed where doctrine said they belonged. Soldiers and Marines tended to adopt whatever they could carry through choking vines and steep slopes. Many found the Garand too long for jungle patrols. Some turned to shotguns. Others picked up Thompsons or M3 grease guns. And a few, very few, chose the little carbine. Its reputation was mixed from the start. In rehearsed briefings and supply meetings, officers referred to it as a convenience tool, not a combat rifle. Some units forbade enlisted men from using it unless issued directly. Complaints circulated about penetration on dense vegetation. Rumors spread that the round lacked stopping power against charging enemies. And as the war pushed deeper into the Central and Southwest Pacific, bureaucratic resistance hardened. Every theater had its ideas about what was proper for a frontline rifleman. That's why his request had been denied. The man who would later drop 9 Japanese snipers in 2 days had originally been told to turn in the weapon. The armorer's words were blunt. He was already issued a standard rifle, He did not need a fence-post carbine. Regulations were regulations. Standardization mattered. And yet, the man kept it. Quietly. Carefully. Wrapped in an oiled cloth, carried in his pack during inspections, brought out only when the patrols grew long and the terrain grew tight. He didn't see it as a replacement for the Garand. He saw it as a tool for a specific kind of war, the kind fought along narrow jungle trails where visibility collapsed and speed mattered more than raw power. In heavy undergrowth, the carbine raised faster, pointed faster, and allowed him to slip between trees without the muzzle catching on vines. And in the sudden bursts of violence that defined Pacific patrols, a fraction of a second was often the difference between hitting a concealed sniper or dropping before finishing the motion. Meanwhile, the Japanese army had spent years developing highly trained marksmen accustomed to concealment, misdirection, and fieldcraft. Their snipers did not always seek spectacular kills. Many preferred psychological pressure. A single shot in the morning, another at dusk, both aimed to erode nerves and paralyze movement. Their rifles, often the Type 97 sniper variant of the Arisaka, were rugged, accurate, and adapted to the thick humidity. Just as important was their discipline. A Japanese sniper could remain motionless for hours, camouflaged within palm fronds or tucked inside a hollowed log. When U.S. forces landed on islands like Bougainville, New Britain, or later Saipan and Guam, they entered landscapes in which the enemy could watch without being seen. Patrol leaders learned to recognize the signs. A snapped twig out of rhythm, a patch of leaves too still in the morning breeze, or an odd silence that suggested a rifle barrel was pointing their way. Casualties mounted from these unseen shooters. Units learned to fear stretches of jungle that seemed to breathe with hostile patience. It was during these months, when sniper attacks spiked and patrols stalled, that the debate over the carbine deepened. Some officers doubled down on restrictions, insisting that only rifles with full-power cartridges could neutralize entrenched marksmen. Others quietly allowed trusted men to carry carbines on patrols, provided they still retained their standard rifle. But the man at the center of our story had already made his choice. When he returned to the line, the little .30 carbine was strapped across his chest, not hidden in his pack. He kept his issued rifle nearby, but he trusted the lighter weapon in the dense interior. And it was in this contested space, between official doctrine and battlefield necessity, that the events of those 48 hours would unfold, pushing him toward a confrontation with some of the most disciplined snipers of the Pacific. Here, in this tightening terrain of rules, skepticism, and lethal jungle warfare, the first angle of the story begins to take shape. He had learned early that the jungle rewarded patience more than strength. Days of moving through vines, mud, and ankle-deep water taught him to listen before stepping and to breathe before aiming. Fear was constant, but it became something he carried like his canteen, a weight he acknowledged but did not let spill. What set him apart wasn't bravado. It was the stillness he could slip into when danger pressed close. Other men grew restless under sniper fire, checking their rifles, shifting positions, whispering guesses. He became quieter. His eyes moved slowly, mapping shadows. His hands rested loose on the small carbine that so many dismissed. In that quiet, he recognized patterns others missed. A cluster of leaves angled against gravity, a glint that didn't match the morning fog, a faint ripple in what should have been still air. These small details, human details, were what enabled him to act when others froze. And it was this calm under threat that shaped the confrontation that followed. The tactic was simple in theory, brutal in practice. Beat the sniper at his own game. The Japanese marksman relied on concealment, patience, and the confidence that American patrols would break formation when pinned. He did the opposite. When a shot cracked overhead, he noted the angle, the echo, the height. He didn't rush toward it. Instead, he circled, moving in half steps, letting the jungle swallow him. He kept low to avoid silhouette, used tree trunks as shields, and waited for the smallest mistake. A breath released too quickly, a shift in the canopy, a second shot fired just a fraction off from the first. While others kept their eyes level, he searched upward, knowing snipers often chose elevated nests. The jungle, thick as it was, offered these perches by moving silently and pressing into the terrain rather than reacting against it. He turned each ambush into an opportunity. The carbine in his hands was merely an extension of a discipline that had taken shape long before those fateful 2 days. The weapon, for all its critics, offered advantages that could not be dismissed in such terrain. The M1 Carbine weighed just over 5 pounds, light enough to carry through knee-high roots, quick enough to shoulder before a sniper could adjust his aim. Its recoil was manageable, allowing rapid follow-up shots if the first didn't land. Its shorter barrel maneuvered easily in the tight web of vines. Most importantly, its balance enabled precise snap shooting, raising, acquiring, firing in one fluid motion. Doubters pointed to its lighter cartridge, the .30 carbine round, arguing it lacked the force to punch through thick vegetation or helmets. But most sniper engagements here occurred at short ranges, where placement, not raw energy, decided outcomes. He knew this. He knew that accuracy mattered more than legend. Where others saw a fence post, he saw a tool tailored for the fight they were actually fighting, not the one described in pre-war doctrine. And in the close, suffocating world of the Pacific interior, that difference mattered with every step he took. Leadership shaped the moment in quieter ways. The official stance was clear. Men should carry their issued rifles and not deviate from standard equipment unless authorized. Command valued predictability, knowing what each man was equipped with, what ammunition they needed, and how their weapons would function in the stress of combat. Yet doctrine often lagged behind experience. His platoon commander, a practical officer hardened by months in the jungle, recognized results before regulations. He didn't openly encourage the carbine's use, but neither did he confiscate it when he saw how effectively it moved in dense brush. The chain of command balanced written policy with battlefield needs, even if no one said so aloud. Allowing the carbine to remain in his hands was a small, silent gamble, one that could have been criticized had it gone poorly. But when sniper fire paralyzed the line and casualties threatened to mount, leadership's willingness to trust initiative became pivotal. And once the events of those 48 hours unfolded, the tone from above grew noticeably different. The enemy brought its own angle, one forged from years of preparation and cultural discipline. Japanese snipers were not random shooters. Many were trained specialists, selected for calm nerves, steady aim, and the ability to blend seamlessly into terrain. Their doctrine emphasized endurance. A sniper might lie motionless for 6 hours, 8 hours, or more, waiting for the single shot that would halt a patrol and instill doubt. Their rifles, worn Arisaka bolts fitted with low-power optics, were rugged and deadly in expert hands. They often constructed firing hides using hollowed logs, tree platforms, or camouflaged pits woven with fronds and brush. To counter such enemies required not only skill, but a willingness to enter their world of silence and tension. He understood this. He grasped that these men were not faceless targets, but trained adversaries operating at close quarters in a deadly exchange of patience. And it was within this duel, hunter against hidden hunter, that the turning point approached, drawing the next 48 hours into focus. All 5 angles now converge on the moment when silence broke and the fight sharpened into immediacy. The first shot came just after sunrise. A clean, cracking report from somewhere high in the canopy, too sharp to be anything but a trained marksman. The round snapped past the platoon's forward scouts and buried itself in a tree trunk behind them. No one saw the muzzle flash. No one saw the shape in the leaves. But he heard the angle, the elevation, and the faint tremor in the branches that followed. The sniper had fired from above, concealed in a platform or natural fork nearly 20 feet up. The patrol froze, as doctrine demanded. Men dropped behind roots, checked their rifles, awaited orders. He didn't wait. He slipped to the right flank, boots sinking into soft ground as he kept close to the widest trees. The carbine rested lightly in his hands, barrel angled upward. Another shot split the morning, this one striking a helmet and knocking its owner into the mud, stunned but alive. The angle was close, too close for the sniper to relocate before counterfire reached him. He saw it then. A ripple, just a slight one, in a tangle of fronds that should have swayed with the breeze. He knelt, exhaled, and raised the carbine. The first round struck the branch below the hide. The second entered the leafy mass and triggered a sudden rustling collapse. A body fell through vines and dropped heavily to the forest floor. That was the first. Word traveled fast through the platoon. Someone muttered that the fence post had found its mark. Another asked whether they should flank deeper. But before decisions formed, the jungle answered again. A second sniper opened fire from the opposite ridge, his shot cracking across the clearing they had just crossed. This one was farther, likely 70 yards, but still close enough to force the patrol to ground. He slid into a shallow depression, using his elbow to pull himself through vines. The ridge ahead formed a diagonal shelf of roots and rock. He knew the sniper would have chosen a position offering both cover sauce and escape routes. A hollow trunk near the ridge caught his eye. Not because it moved, but because it didn't. Every breeze in the valley brushed the surrounding grass except there. He steadied the carbine, leaned against a root, and waited for the third shot. When it came, the muzzle flash bloomed faintly inside the trunk. He fired twice in rapid succession. The second sniper slumped forward, rifle sliding down the ridge before catching on a protruding vine. By midday, the platoon advanced again, but tension rose with each step. The Japanese defense in this sector relied heavily on hidden marksmen, each positioned to bleed momentum from American patrols. Intelligence had warned of 3, possibly 4, operating in the area. No one expected 9. The third sniper attacked during the crossing of a narrow creek. The shot struck the water near the lead man's foot, the splash concealing its origin. But he noticed something else: the absence of birdsong in a single cluster of trees upstream. He motioned silently, moved ahead, and saw through a gap the faint outline of a rifle barrel nestled between 2 branches. One well-placed shot dropped the concealed figure onto the bank. By evening, the 4th and 5th emerged in quick succession, one firing from a camouflaged pit, the other from a palm crown. The rapid pace of their attacks suggested coordination, as if they were testing the patrol's reactions, probing for hesitation. But each time he worked outward, mapping angles, absorbing the rhythm of the jungle. The carbine snapped to his shoulder again and again, its light frame enabling the speed he needed. 2 more shots found their marks. Night fell without further contact. The platoon dug shallow positions and waded through the humid dark, nerves stretched thin. He cleaned the carbine by lantern light, wiping moisture from the metal and checking each magazine. He didn't speak. No one asked him to. At dawn, the 6th attack came before they had even broken camp. A sniper hidden in a woven blind fired into the perimeter, the round tearing through a ration tin. The sound gave him the location's direction, but not the position. So he listened. The morning air was quiet except for a faint rustle. Too rhythmic, too controlled. He crawled toward it, brushing aside dew-covered leaves until a void appeared, a slit barely wide enough for a rifle barrel. He fired once. When the blind sagged, the 6th was done. The 7th sniper countered an hour later, firing from a tree fork overlooking a steep ravine. The shot narrowly missed a radio man leaning to adjust his antenna. The sniper expected panic. Instead, he found someone already angling toward him. A flash of movement in the canopy gave away his shifting weight. The carbine bucked softly, and the figure toppled. By the time the 8th and 9th revealed themselves, one firing from a log hollow, the other from a tight knot of vines, the patrol had grown accustomed to the strange rhythm of these engagements, yet each encounter remained razor-thin. A half-second slower, a footstep louder, and the outcome might have shifted. But his movements remained deliberate, each shot measured, each position chosen with care. The carbine, once dismissed as a rear echelon tool, spoke with quiet authority through the jungle. When the final sniper fell, silence settled over the valley. Not the uneasy silence of an ambush, but a deep, exhausted stillness. Men looked at him, at the carbine, then at the canopy above as if expecting another shot. None came. 48 hours. 9 snipers. One weapon they had been told not to bring. And as they gathered themselves to continue the advance, the consequences of what had just unfolded began to take shape in quiet remarks and hurried reports. By the time the platoon reached the company perimeter later that afternoon, word of the engagements had already moved ahead of them. Runners passed it along in fragments. 9 snipers neutralized. 2 days, no losses to counterfire. Officers paused over maps, trying to reconcile the report with the known Japanese sniper activity in that sector. What they had expected was a slow, grinding advance punctuated by scattered casualties. What they received instead was something closer to a dismantling of the enemy's forward eyes and ears. At first, the company commander thought the number must be inflated. Pacific patrols were notorious for miscounts. Fallen snipers were often dragged into brush or lost to the terrain. But the patrol leader stood by the figure, and the bodies had been marked where possible. The commander's skepticism shifted, first to curiosity, then to a quiet recognition of what it meant tactically. Removing even one skilled sniper could change the tempo of a jungle push. Removing 9 in 48 hours meant the entire network of overwatch positions in that valley had collapsed. Reports were drafted that evening. The patrol's movement was sketched out on the operations board. The distances, shot angles, and concealment sites were recorded meticulously. And as the details settled, one line in the report drew immediate attention. The weapon used for the majority of the engagements was not the issued standard rifle. It was the same lightweight carbine previously dismissed as unsuitable for frontline sniper counteraction. There was no ceremony about it. no dramatic meeting where doctrine shifted on the spot. But something quieter happened. A company armorer, who had once insisted the carbine be left behind, now inspected the weapon with a different expression. Less annoyance, more consideration. Platoon leaders, reviewing their after-action notes, wondered whether the assumptions they carried into the jungle needed rethinking. And in the next resupply cycle, more carbines were requested than before, not officially replacing rifles, but supplementing them, filling gaps where mobility mattered more than raw power. Meanwhile, up the chain, intelligence officers revisited their assessment of Japanese sniper deployments in the region. The sudden loss of so many shooters created an unexpected silence in the valley. Units previously pinned down along narrow trails reported freer movement. Ambushes decreased. Scouting patrols pushed further with fewer casualties. The absence of sniper fire, a previously constant threat, gave commanders a window to reposition their forces and secure ground that had been dangerous only days prior. On the Japanese side, the effect was equally significant. Their sniper training emphasized individual initiative, but the network itself depended on overlapping angles and mutual coverage. Losing so many at once disrupted not just battlefield vision, but morale. Surviving shooters, realizing their positions had become vulnerable, pulled further back or relocated hastily, decisions that reduced their effectiveness and introduced small but important gaps in their defense. For them, the jungle no longer guaranteed invisibility. Within the platoon, the mood changed. Men who once teased the fence post carbine now spoke of it with a subdued respect. They remembered how quickly shots had been returned, how fluidly it moved through vines, how it seemed almost made for the close, stifling terrain they fought in. No one asked him whether he would go back to carrying his rifle as primary. That question had answered itself during the march out of the valley. In the days that followed, he was called in to provide a detailed account of each encounter. Officers asked where the snipers had been positioned, how he had detected them, and what decisions guided his movement. He spoke plainly, without exaggeration, without self-importance, about shadows, leaves, concealment patterns, and the instinct that comes from hundreds of hours in the bush. But each time the discussion circled back to the weapon, he reminded them it was not the carbine alone that produced the results. It was familiarity, how its balance, weight, and handling aligned with the demands of a jungle that punished any hesitation or excess movement. Still, the kill count remained the kill count. Official channels tended to flatten nuance, and soon the story boiled down to a single line. A soldier armed with an M1 Carbine had eliminated 9 Japanese snipers in 48 hours. It wasn't recorded as myth. It was entered as fact. The effect rippled beyond his unit. Other formations heard the story, first in fragments, then in more complete accounts. Field commanders wrestling with the weapon assignment problem took notice. Carbine distribution gradually widened, and restrictions loosened. It never replaced the rifle, and it remained controversial among some, but jungle patrol leaders increasingly recognized it as a tool rather than a liability. By the time the campaign advanced to the next island, the lesson had settled into practice. Units now allowed, sometimes encouraged, trusted marksmen or scout-trained soldiers to carry the lighter weapon on recon and counter-sniper patrols. The jungle had dictated the weapon mix, and doctrine had shifted, not through orders from above, but through the accumulated weight of field experience. For the men who had marched through that valley, the aftermath was simpler and more personal. They remembered the sudden quiet after the 9th sniper fell. They remembered the relief in moving without fearing the crosshairs hidden somewhere in the treetops. and they remembered the strange, almost humbling realization that the difference between being pinned or advancing had come down to one man, one decision, and one small carbine that the war had nearly left behind. As the company prepared for its next push inland, those memories stayed with them. Quiet reminders of how quickly the rhythm of a campaign could shift when doctrine met reality. And in that space between what was written and what was lived, the story found its lasting meaning. In the years after the war, the story of those 48 hours was told in pieces, passed through unit reunions, drifting into reports, appearing briefly in training circles before fading again. It never became legend, because legends grow from embellishment, and this story required none. Its weight came from how ordinary it was, a single soldier following instinct and discipline, using a weapon few respected, in a patch of jungle indistinguishable from 100 others. Nothing about it was grand, and yet the meaning endured. The Pacific taught every army the same lesson in different ways, that technology does not dictate outcomes on its own. Terrain, human judgment, and the quiet decisions made in the space between heartbeats often mattered more. The carbine, for all the arguments surrounding it, proved effective not because it was flawless, but because one man understood what the jungle demanded. He carried the weapon that matched the fight he was actually in, not the one planners had imagined in classrooms far from the canopy. There is something deeply human in that contradiction. Armies seek order, standardized weapons, formal doctrine, predictable outcomes. War resists all of that. It bends rules, challenges assumptions, and forces individuals to act in ways manuals can't fully capture. What he accomplished in that valley didn't reshape global strategy or alter the war's direction, but it did remind everyone who heard the story that adaptability is not an abstract principle. It's a lived necessity. The 9 snipers he faced were not faceless enemies. They were trained professionals operating in the terrain that favored them. Their defeat didn't come from superior firepower. It came from a sharper understanding of the environment, the discipline to move slowly when fear urged haste, and the patience to let the jungle reveal its secrets one shadow at a time. Those qualities are harder to quantify than muzzle velocity or range tables, yet they remain at the core of combat effectiveness. History often focuses on commanding generals, sweeping offensives, and the machinery of war. But battles are shaped just as often by the quiet decisions of individuals, moments when skill and circumstance align. His story is one of those moments. It doesn't argue for or against the carbine. It simply shows what can happen when a soldier trusts his training, understands his terrain, and refuses to let convention dictate his every move. In the end, the small, weathered weapon once dismissed as a fence post carved its name into those 2 days of history, not through myth, but through measured action. And the jungle, whose silence had once signaled danger, became, for a brief moment, a witness to how quickly the balance between hunter and hunted can shift. The war moved on. The valley was left behind, but the lesson remained. Sometimes the smallest tools in the right hands carry the greatest weight.